Have you ever had a really good conversation and it was so good you really wanted to Frankenstein it back together and can that sucker so you could reference it again and maybe show it to other people and maybe try to explain what you're talking about at times when you can't explain what you're talking about? Well, I had one of them earlier today, and so a friend of mine offered to try and help me do that. And so we went for it. And we didn't talk exactly about the same thing, but the really key points we managed to get back to in a way that wasn't completely abrupt. I'm still learning how to record conversations via video chat, and so the visuals aren't as smooth as I would like, but the audio seems good. And this is a recording of SallyJoMCooper and Mark LaFear from the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis chat room. And this conversation circles around topics on the Bridges of Meaning Discord, which is a Discord related to the work of Pastor Paul Vanderklay, and his work is related to Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, and Jonathan Pageau has become essential to all of them with his work on the symbolic world. Jonathan Pageau is a Greek Orthodox icon carver. And for those of you unfamiliar with me, I am a visual artist. I went to college for it, and I'm working on developing my own practice. Due to COVID and parental responsibilities, I've decided to put the main body of my work for free on YouTube with explanations about my paintings and processes in as much detail as the medium allows. So, I am SallyJoMCooper. Welcome to the edge of my mind. Let's jump in.
I haven't learned them all. In the old days, you could, because tools were very specific, but now tools are cheap.
Well, if I could just download the freaking systems I used other places, but you can't. It's illegal. Alright. So, Mark, hi. I am
Hello.
SallyJoMCooper. This is a friend from the Meaning Crisis chat room, which is one of a number of thought communities I participate in. And today, a conversation from a different one of those thought communities, Bridges of Meaning, with Paul Vanderklay as the kind of primary figurehead. There was a video that came out. This is terrible. I'm going to cut this part because I just spiraled once I hit record. So maybe we should just jump into it, and I'll do an intro later.
That's fine.
Okay. Hi, Mark. We are here to talk about church aesthetics.
Yeah, and art and the role of art in churches
right.
in what we might call, the meaning crisis, or what's happening with around that whole thing. It all seems strangely related, right?
Right. And I haven't done many videos on stuff like this. I've done mostly referring directly to my own art, and then I've done a few on books, and I've done one on Peterson, but it's kind of inescapable, even though I don't consider myself a figure of cultural commentary. It so directly affects my art and my purpose. I think about it, a lot, apparently. And so I keep talking about it in these chat rooms, and we decided we wanted to can some of that, and that's the premise of this video. And, yeah. So, how to make art without it being witchcraft, basically. That's kind of part of it.
Yeah, that was more the part we were interested in, right?
Yeah.
What we were talking about on Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord was more around the well, what role does art play in terms of symbolism, right? Because we think symbolism is part of meaning crisis and the loss of meaning. And one of the things that we put forth was, well, this art that's related to religion seems to be good art. Like there's good things
Right.
about it. And the art that's not tied to religion, that wasn't commissioned by the church or by somebody who was religious, seems to be of a different sort. And then we're not sure. Does that have anything to do with, does that have a societal commentary to it? Like, is this a relationship that we can look at? And that's what you were talking about, was different churches and right, and what you thought was happening there.
That caused me to make my insane timeline of things, which, yeah, because some of the things that correlate with art being terrible, it's really hard to pin down why. And the really major ones that we're continuously revisiting in Meaning Crisis and Bridges of Meaning, and anybody who's involved with Peterson, or anybody that really just hates postmodernism, what we are dealing with is basically what came after Romanticism. And you have the post-impressionism, and it all really, it starts before the World Wars, but it is directly affected by the World Wars. And Cubism and Futurism and Dada are all like these precursors that are moving away from the classical. And the classical and the high Renaissance is where, like, everybody knows art's wrapped up with the church, but the formal academy that ends up being rejected by... Okay, no, I have to go back further for this to be reasonable. Okay, so there was classical art in Rome, and they portrayed the human form heroically, which is the head is a seventh of the rest of the body, and then things are trying to be in perspective. They weren't exactly in perspective. And the Roman statues were not white. They were colored. And that's important because the white thing is a class phobia, non-emotional thing, and it's different than colored statues. So that's just relevant. And so you have that, and then you slip into the medieval period, and the art is very arts and crafts, and the artists are not part of a specific academy. They're parts of guilds, and they work for lords, and they do a very stylized art. It's more stylized than it is realism. And so it's completely moved away. And then, when the Renaissance starts, there's a number of things that happen. One is the rediscovery of classical sculpture, rediscovery of that heroic proportions thing that's also happening in philosophy. There's a reintegration of those philosophical ideas back in the truth, reason, less demon signs.
So Sally, what you're saying there is you're creating a relationship between the change in the culture, right, where there's a reawakening of the old cultures, and they're integrating it into the new order, right? Because the church wasn't around then,
and
right?
The reason I'm tying it back this far is because all of this pursuit of logic, reason, order gets stronger, and you get to, during the Renaissance, is when art gets broken off from craft, and art becomes its own kind of thing, and that's where the artist gets more control, and when the individual artist has more control, but they sort of do and they sort of don't, because it's fishy, because they're confined by the academy, because the hierarchy of their standing is within this classical academy, and you gotta be a certain person, and you gotta be a dude usually, and so on and so on and so on. And so then you get into the neoclassical, the Baroque, the Rococo, which is really ornate, really formal. That happens right during and after Martin Luther. And that's important because that super embellishment of the Rococo and the Baroque, I think, is part of this let's be different cultures between the Protestants and the Catholics. Now, the Greek Orthodox, because they're over in Constantinople and there's not as much exchange, they're kind of like NPCs in that whole exchange. They're kind of doing their own thing. They maintain their own styles. They're influenced like by their area. So, I mean, you can... That's where I got into making this. I could have added all of these little mini European wars, but it would have just... Yeah. It would have got too crazy. They're related. They're directly related. Like, the Nords conquering Europe after Britain, after Rome conquered Britain, and you got all this cross-exchange. But, anyway, So
did the Art Academy change as a result?
Yes.
Like, was the person driving the art changing as a result of the Reformation? Is that?
Well, I think so. I think part of the reason there was such extremes, I think the Catholic Church was like, no, we're going to do pictures more ornate. And the Lutherans and the Protestants in general were just like, absolutely no ornamentation whatsoever. And so at first, there was this, like, diligent minimalism. And I'm only using the word minimalism because people kind of understand minimalism right now, and that's kind of its own little mini movement as a rejection of consumerism. Well, Lutheranism was kind of like, you know, maybe you don't have to have a giant little, like, what are the in-house, there's like little in-house Mary, like, it's not an altar, but there's a little sanctuary space that you set up for your patron saint of your house and your patron saint of Mary and your whatever ongoing, like your mom and your namesake and all of that. And when Lutheranism came on, that was kind of coming to its peak, and there was so much, and I could imagine that, gosh, that was an expense. And the books of hours were like a huge luxury item that could be purchased that were probably really expensive. And it was probably like, it was fun, it was exciting, but it's also like freaking MacBooks. It was probably burdensome to keep up. And so I think there's these other little mini drives underneath, you know, maybe some people were convicted about wanting to be Lutheran, and maybe some people just were like, damn, it's cheaper to be Lutheran.
Like, and are there different commissions, like, for art now? Is that just different people commissioning different types of art?
Well, yeah. Well, the printing press. The printing press happens in 1400, and that wasn't the movable type printing press, but that was like, you could make a print and there's more than one, and that's where people started getting prints in their homes. And that type of art was, of course, influenced by the Renaissance, but it also became very fun, very obscene. It was like comics. It was affordable, and people could put it up, and some of it was humor, and some of it was church scriptural, and some of it was just mocking lords. Like,
that's sort of like the introduction of cheaper materials, mm-hmm. or cheaper access
and
to art.
And everybody gets it.
Cheapens it.
Yes.
Yeah, well,
everybody,
sure.
But then that also added to the ability of the church to sell it, because that's when you could get the people that had their name saints and their house saints and all of that in their house. So it was this amplification of a type of consumerism. As like, there's no new problems. Like, we have the same problems. But then it's also what made it possible for Protestantism to break off, and then you have the German Bible printed in 1512, and the 1512 German Bible printing aligns up here with Mannerism. It's before Michelangelo finishes the Last Judgment thing, so like, you just have so much going on at the same time. Like, you have Martin Luther and Michelangelo painting the Sistine Chapel, like, right in the same little period, like, and so it's really interesting. So like, between Michelangelo painting the Sistine Chapel and Michelangelo painting the Last Judgment is when Martin Luther and the German Bible all went down. And so like, it's something to, like, I don't know, maybe I'm crossing too many wires, but it's just really interesting to me to think about, like, just to think about, like, this is happening in Italy, this is happening in Germany, like, there's people running around with illegal prints of Bibles while people are selling indulgences to pay for the Sistine Chapel of the church. Well, Spain is conquering the New World, because you have is it like, you have Columbus in America, and so then you have this Spain getting gold to pay for all of the Baroque, which is like, that's freaking fascinating too. But anyway, so you have this establishment of the classical, which moves into the neoclassical, which moves into the romantic. With the romantic is kind of a return to the emotional painting, and that's why, like, the classic one everybody knows is The Wanderer in a Sea of Fog, which is the guy on the mountain. But that, in a way, is just a different way of depicting and a different subject. But it is not a movement away over portraying realistic form or the loss of confidence in meaning. The loss of confidence in meaning can be pegged right in with the world wars, because everybody thought technology was going to save us all, and then when it didn't, it was just the destruction and the bloodshed and the chaos. Just, it's like it broke the psyche of people in a way. And that's the Dada and the Futurism and all of that, and you start getting these ground up, cubic, geometric, mutation human people things that, and that's, it all happens in there, which is crazy, because I thought I had expanded this enough, and I really needed to expand the 1900s. Like, it could have been half the page, because it's all happening in the 1900s.
So before that, though, I mean, do we see a shift in who's making the art? Like, what their nationalities are, or what their religious convictions are?
Part of
not just
that
commission.
is, like, always everyone is making it, and you don't get that from history. What you get from history is who we've decided to remember and for why. So you're getting the narrative history has chosen. And so it's almost just as interesting that history has chosen specific narrative. Also, I forgot that the introduction of photography left artists in crisis, because the peak moneymaker was portraiture. And then it's like... And so you can't forget that, because this movement away from realism, partially, it's all this stuff that we've been talking about, but partially, it's just really practically, photographers took over, and there were tintypes right away, and then it just moved forward from there, better and better photos, to the point that we're talking on a video chat that can be recorded and sent out internationally, which is mind-boggling. So yeah, you can't forget the photography's influence on all of it, as well as just the world wars. And anyway, you didn't watch the little church video that I put up, did you?
No, I didn't.
So I was refreshing on all of this, because the really difference in the way churches are, I just wanted to make sure I could spit it out well. So, like, the Catholic and the Greek Orthodox have a very historic style, pattern, agreed upon, pre-plan, and they're made to be enduring, and they're made with, like, they purposefully put money into a spot as a long-term investment. Whereas a lot of Protestant churches, at least the really modern ones, seem to go for convenience, ability to serve the public, and then ability to gather up money to maybe send away. They're more comfortable spending money to send away. And then also they're more... they want to serve the people. The people aren't necessarily there to serve them. And one of the things I noticed, I'll try and get it linked in here. There's a little 10-minute video on churches, and this guy he went around to a bunch of churches in California. But I think you could do it anywhere. And one of the things, he didn't mention this, but I noticed this. I think the big difference between the way the Catholics and the Orthodox and the Protestants build churches and make churches and do the whole structure scene is the Catholics and the Orthodox are assertive, you will abide. And even you walk into them and you're silenced by the architecture. Whereas the Protestant churches are, come to us, speak to us, tell us your story. And I think maybe both have value, but I definitely think an unwillingness to assert yourself upon society is not good. And I don't know if that's just something sneaky about the nature of evangelicalism that leaves you weak, or if maybe that is actually a treasure, because then you're more mobile, you're more agile, you're more flexible, and maybe that's a huge positive. I really don't know. It's just something that I'm observing.
Yeah, it's a difference. So I mean, that's something like, in one case, these churches are building art in as part of the church, and in the other case, they're building it as part of the service of the church, right? So the Protestants are
Well,
like,
yeah,
oh, the church services people, so we'll just put some art here to
absolutely,
service the
because
people.
the Protestants definitely focus on performance art, which is, it all ends up being music or plays or it's very avant-garde. It's like,
Right.
let's
That's not structural either,
no,
right?
no,
Like
it's
you go to
let's
if you
teach.
go to Rosslyn Castle for Rosslyn Chapel, for example, because I went to Rosslyn Chapel recently, it's just like everything's ornate. Like every part of that thing is decorated to the hilt, right? It's just decoration all over. It's gorgeous,
No,
gorgeous stuff. But that's built into the architecture of the chapel, right? And the stuff that's hung there is hung there deliberately.
no, but like a Protestant service, you'll have kids being Roman soldiers for a play, and so it's not that there's not value in it. It's just a different thing, and
Right.
maybe it like depends on the time which is needed. Maybe when the
Yeah.
structures that maybe when the structures that are around society are really, really solid, it's really nice to have a soft hand that can seep into all the cracks that aren't being touched. But then when the structures that are around people in governance aren't solid, gosh, it's comforting to have a stable stone building that stood for 200 years, and there's some people there that seem to have their heads screwed on, and they're going to do what they're going to do no matter what, which I wish they were, because that was my great disappointment with the whole mass mandate in the Orthodox Church. But anyway.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's interesting, right? So some of the concepts we talk about are like historical grounding, right? And art gives you some historical grounding, especially if it's old or even if it's based on older art. There's a history there, right? There's a solidity that you can't get any other
And
way.
that's the sneakiness of the portrayal of realism is wrapped up with the whole Platonic philosophy and humanism, and I didn't get to look into that as much as I should have to be able to spit it out. But the portrayal of realism, especially the portrayal of three-dimensional space, is part of that philosophy of truth. Like, it might as well be Platonian, which is crazy, because when the Platonian ideas get lost, the art gets lost. And when the Platonian ideas get revered, the art gets restored. And that's the portrayal of 3D space. They're wrapped up with that idea. It's also wrapped up with squares and circles and symmetry. And the Baroque, sneaky, but the Baroque shows the breaking of that because they start to revere the oval as the better form. It's like, we are higher than logic. It's very, like, and like, why? Why is that? That is, like, somehow it's a divergence from reason to use the oval instead of the circle. But it definitely was, because that was like the beginning of the falling away of doing that type of art, was to do the Baroque. Or to do the ovals. I don't understand why the ovals, because I like them. That's the kicker here. I like the Baroque and I like the Rococo, but it's like it's like you have too much frosting on a freaking cupcake and it crumbles over its own weight or something. And I don't know why exactly. And then I really like the Romantic too, but the Romantic in some ways is sliding away, which, yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
this all seems tied up in this
It
idea.
is.
So, I mean, if you go more towards realism, are you actually going away from the more symbolic or metaphorical
Well,
aspect of the message, or
I think you can go too far into realism, because if you go so far into realism that you can't portray the psychological, and the psychological becomes heretical, or the psychological becomes demonic, then you have a problem too. Because, like, you need to be able to portray the heart on fire. Because it's not real, but it's symbolically accurate. And when you can't, it's like a problem, because painting isn't photography. It can't just be photography. If it is only photography, then we should be like Islam, and the only creativity that's accepted should be just geometric forms and maybe flowers.
Wow, that sounds terrible. But
that's the other thing too. I put it in here for that reason. Oh gosh, I can't find it. I remember which side I put it on. Because Muhammad slides his whole little group out of this whole little issue by just banning images. I mean, he has a point. They have power. They're uncontrollable.
Right.
It doesn't happen
Paul
right away either in
about
Islam.
that.
I'm not exactly sure when iconoclasm starts in Islam, but iconoclasm starts in Islam, and then back and forth, the church picks up on it, and they're like, that seems like a lovely idea. Ban them all. And everybody takes turns, because the Orthodoxy had a banning of iconoclasm for a while. The Catholic Church had a maybe we should cover up the penises kind of thing for a while, and then the Protestants, it's all like, well, maybe you can have pictures, but maybe it should just be a lamb and a lion. No, lamb and lions are demonic. On and on. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, there's all this back and forth. Yeah, iconoclasm is such a contradiction in everything all the time, right? It goes too far, and then it doesn't go far enough, and yeah. So you're speaking to the power, like when Paul was talking to Jonathan Pageau about this, right? They were talking about this whole idea of these Christ statues based on the local politics, right? It's wow, that's fascinating. Very powerful symbolism.
Like if I wanted to look up the images, I could have pulled up 7 nativities, and I could have just talked on phobias in art across 7 nativities, because you got the whole Orthodox thing where Joseph's arm can't be around people, and then you got the whole Protestant thing where they better not be gold, maybe they better not be in color, maybe they should just be wood carvings. Do they include 3 wise men? Are the wise men black? Are they Jewish? What if the whole family's Hispanic? What if the whole family's Chinese? What's the relationship? And it's very curious to me why it's so hard for Protestants to understand that portraying the Holy Family as different nationalities should be a good thing. Because I think it was one of the smart plays by the Catholic Church, because it's not saying Christ is black, Christ is whatever. It's not saying that. It's saying Christ is your family. Mary is your family. And there's no clearer way to do that, but to do that, and this is where Jacob would be interesting on this, because Jacob is he an Orthodox Jew? Or is he just very Jewish? He's just very Jew into Judaism. I'm not sure. But he was talking to us all, and he said one of the things that makes him sad about Christianity is Christians say God sent his only son. And that makes him sad, because we are all God's sons and daughters and family. And I'm like, and that's why you should be able to portray Christ in any race, color, ethnicity, whatever, any time. And they were doing a really good job of that. I'm not exactly sure when they quit, and I would have liked to have found it, but all throughout the Renaissance, and I think before that, they would redo especially Mary and the Christ Child in a modern scene. There's a really famous one of Mary in I think it was a Dutch house, and she's got, you can tell it's much more modern than it would have been in modern's day. They have a gas lamp, and Joseph is in a room beside her, because it's a triptych. Joseph is in another room, and he's got all these modern tools that set him in the time period. And then one door is the family of patrons that commissioned it to be painted, and they're knocking at Mary's door. And I really wish we were doing art that, like, I really, like, it's hard for me because, like, I don't have time to do studies, and I need to do more studies of people because I'm not quite at portraiture level. I'm just not. I can occasionally pull it off, but, like, it's tough. That's just a level I'm not at yet. But I would like to get a model and have somebody sit at a bistro with a blue hoodie on and, like, basically redo all of this contextual stuff that if you were a Christian familiar with the language at all, you could tell these are the things that identify Mary, and Christ in a bassinet and maybe Mary with a latte. I don't know. But, like, I think that would help people understand that personal relationship, because it's not just about Mary and the Son of God and Christ. It's like, how do you relate to the stranger? This woman with this child with a questionable husband could be the mother of God. It should be like that.
Yeah, so you're pointing sort of towards the symbolic usage of the art in the right, and then so my very limited understanding is there's, from what I can tell, three basic types, right? There's the original, sort of like the old style stuff, right? And then there's the modernized, stylized, old stuff, right? It's still the old characters, but the scenery's updated. And then there's the mixed stuff where you have the symbols of someone like Mary, but done not as Mary, clearly not as Mary, but using that symbolism, right? And so that just gives different people access to that symbol. And it seems like what you're pointing to is that the church has lost the purpose of the symbolism for use in the church, like as a method of the mission of the church.
It's really brutal because it's an identification. Like, if you can't use symbolism, you also can't speak secular. It's the same problem. The church, a huge, like, Paul's the only one. Paul's the only one. Like, that's why I'm still kind of just, like, in awe of his existence, because so many pastors, you try to speak secular to them, and they don't want to acknowledge it's real, and they want you to jump back on board speaking church. And I can't, and I won't. I won't do it, because it's just left a bunch of people out to dry. And it pushes you into team playing, and it pushes you into dishonesty. And that's a tough place to be. And the inability to speak secular is the same, I think, as the inability to use, to make effective art. And I guess maybe that's why the church hires people outside of the church to make church art, and maybe that's exactly what we need to go do. Maybe we need to go find some homosexuals to re-articulate the story of the Nativity, because it doesn't seem like you can do it from the inside. I don't know why. And I don't want to foment any doubt or cause problems for people, but it's like a little tragedy that I seem to be observing.
Yeah, you talk a lot about that, about the differences between the churches that you see and what that means to you, and that's always fascinating to me because I know nothing about art. And so, when you talk about these things, it just seems like there's a symbolism gap, right? So when you hear somebody like Jonathan Pageau talk about the symbolism, right, he's not talking about the art per se, right? He's talking about all the messaging behind it. Yeah. Well, and that's what we've lost, right? Now, is that sort of what you're getting at?
Yeah, well, and then you have to go back, we were talking about, if you remove symbolism, you don't. So, like, I've observed this, like, when you get rid of all the gold foil, and you get rid of Christ on the cross, and then you get rid of hearts around the cross, and you get rid of halos, and you get rid of all the pictures on the walls, well, you still have font. You still have the style of pews. You still have red carpet or blue carpet or wood floors. You still have, now we have screens. So now we have swirling postmodern fog displays. We have post-industrial faux lights that dangle down from the ceiling to give you like this feel of modernization. We have the bold red wall with a complementary gray streak. And all of that is symbolic art. You've just displaced historical symbolic art with post-1960s, kind of outdated modernism. And modernism is like the scourge of so much reason you're unreasonable. And no sanctity, no sacred. And you let anybody who wants to up and down on the altar, and you have little plastic communion cups, and you don't share a silver chalice. And yeah, and it's not that those things are necessarily wrong, but relinquishing that beauty in pursuit of righteousness, I think, is cruel.
Oh, I like your characterization. So you're saying they're replacing one virtue for another. That sounds interesting. And then so what? And you've wrapped up a couple of other interesting things, right? But just to focus it back on the symbolism behind the art, right? So you're saying that you can't remove art; it's going to be there, right? You try to remove it, and you're still getting the same level of signaling. So what symbols? What symbols did you replace it with when you removed the art? Like what signals is that sending to people, as opposed to the historical?
Well, I think some
signals?
of the over accentuation of like rationalism and postmodernism and like this doesn't matter gets pushed in, because that's so to figure out what I want to tie it to. So I have this like underpinning art theory that I developed in college so postmodernism, one of the key components is everything is a matter of perspective, so there is no truth. They don't quite say it that way all the time, but that's like the key component. Well, unfortunately in art, that sort of relates, it's inescapable. If you talk about truth, you're talking about beauty. You can't not. They're entangled. And so if you say there is no truth, then you say there is no beauty, and then you become forced to prove it. And then you have to make ugly things. And then you get giant red walls with gray stripes. And I'm picking on that one because I see it a lot. But you get to doing these, well, we can't make it decadent, so let's make everything brown. And then you're like, well, we can't be like so-and-so, so let's, like, you just get these decisions to move away from the elegant purposefully to show your piety. And it's very irritating to me. And then you can't portray people because they might be worshipped, so instead you portray the lamb and the lion. And then maybe you can't even portray the lamb and the lion, so you have to portray the blank cross. And probably can't be metal, or maybe it should be metal. Maybe we should only use metal nails. Oh, well, they can't be roofing nails. They should be squared off nails, because that would be more like the Roman nails. And like, you get into these deranged purity spirals, and it just gets crazy. And like, you might as well just reinstate the language of flowers and use flowers everywhere, like Islam. I don't know.
Yeah, so you're pointing at a couple of different things, right? One is the starkness of the church gives you nothing to hang on to, and it kind of pushes you away, this brown or stripes or this crazy stuff, right?
And then it makes it just as appropriate to have a church in an old shopping mall space as an actual church building with a spire. And then, like, maybe it's good, maybe it's convenient, or maybe it's telling people that the church is the same as Publix or any other super grocery market chain.
Right. There's all that symbolism's wrapped up in that.
And this is where I'm talking about the little 10-minute church video. There is a loss of the church's willingness to exert its influence on the public. It's not willing to say, no, I will influence this. And like, I think when you do that, you get pushed around by the sea of culture. And you shouldn't be, that's not, I don't think the church should be pushed around by the sea of culture. And
yeah, it's not a principality anymore.
yeah,
right,
it makes me feel nervous to say, because I feel like there's flack from 1,000 realms that can come after that, but it should not. It should not bend. And I'm seeing it bend on every level. And it wasn't just, and like, I am back in a Pentecostal church that does have all of these aesthetic things that I don't like, because I saw the Orthodox Church bend its knee about certain policies right now, and it made me sad. And so it's like, I'm not winning anywhere. I'm just as caught up with everybody else, like, but I gotta talk about it, think about it, see what I can do. Like, I don't know, I'm just making my stuff, and I don't know. No.
Yeah, it's hard when you don't have that grounding, especially if there's supposed to be a truth or a sacredness or beauty to art, then where else is that coming from other than the religious tradition, right?
Yeah. Well, and you get a Protestants screw, because it says you should give your gifts to the Lord. And then, if you're gifted at portraying symbols or images or paintings, and you offer it up as many times as it is available, people are like, oh, thank you. Okay. And maybe if you're really lucky, you can paint rocks with kids during some VBS. Like, maybe. And then maybe if you are painting stuff with kids at a VBS or a summer camp, don't paint a dragon on a kite because dragons fly. That won't go over well.
No, so it's not just the art in the church; it's the engagement with art of the church members.
Oh, yes.
So you're tying together like three different things, right? Like the sacredness of the church in the setting, the sacredness of the interior, and the sacredness that it engages in with the flock.
This
right?
is even goofier. So it very much relates to how people feel with comfort with guns. Symbolism is like the cultural comfort with guns. People who know how to use guns and can use guns are safer with guns and also not scared of them. And people who don't use guns don't even want you to play with toy guns, because that teaches you how to use real guns, which are super unsafe. That's the way symbolism, like my experience with symbolism is. People who are scared of symbolism are scared of symbolism across the board. Don't ever touch it. Doesn't matter if you know what you're doing. Doesn't matter if you're authentically inspired. And I think that's really screwy, because anybody who thinks visually, or anything that you don't have language to dictate, you are robbed of any of that power. Because a lot of my images, I can't explain them, I can't spell them out until much after I've painted or drawn them. Because they are the thoughts before words. And if you are robbing yourself of your ability to figure out your thoughts before words, that's a problem, I think.
Yeah, it's certainly a tool. And then, I think, like people are afraid to engage with it. But, to the earlier point, it's dangerous stuff. Art can be really dangerous, right? So yeah, it's not like there's no danger there. It's just like, well, how do you shape it? How do you direct it? And if you are unwilling to move the congregation or the flock or whatever into telling them, no, this art is good and this art is bad, then yeah.
Well, and that's what leaves you super, super vulnerable, leaving people incapable of speaking openly about symbolic language because you didn't stop the rest of culture from using it. And it's coming into you through your movies, it's coming into you through your zombie shows, it's coming into you through the vampires and the werewolves and all of this stuff. And if you don't see it clearly and understand its effect on you, all of a sudden you're a feminist. Not the good kind. And
it's gonna colonize you one way or the other, right? Because again, you can't remove the art, you can't remove the symbolism.
Man, I look at myself in my early 20s, and some of the stuff I had just sponged up, and nobody had told me I had just sponged up some ideas about how I had to be from society, and I had no defense against them, and I was convinced of them. And it's taken me years to wash them out. Just years and years to wash them out. And now that I see them clearly, I'm like, damn, I should have done this, I should have done this, I should have done this. And that was part of a long time me being embittered with the church, because it didn't prepare me for any of that. And I didn't know that that was what it was. I just knew I was embittered.
Yeah, so the manifestation happens either way, and then they talked in the video about Pageau and Vanderklay about colonization, right? And then we were talking about in general on the server, we were talking about this idea that it's things you don't pay attention to that take you over, right? Because you're not paying attention to them, so you don't know to keep them at bay, and they just sneak up on you.
That's the interesting thing about daily prayer or meditation, and I do think I used to be very skeptical of repetitive prayer, and I thought it was, there's like a verse about the vain repetitions, and beware of the vain repetitions. But the thing is, the pleading prayers that end up being what Protestants pray without having a structural repetition are not always helpful. Like, it's good to directly speak from God. But when you are trying to think of something to say for grace, listing your wants to the divine is not healthy. Not necessarily. Often you don't know what you want, let alone what you need. And so the Lord's Prayer or something like that, or just having like a thankfulness prayer, and just that being your auto prayer is much healthier. And like a lot of my, like what I consider meditation, like it's really messed up that meditation and prayer are identified as separate things. Because I don't think they would have to be. I don't think they can be. I don't think they are. I think meditation and prayer, the way people use the words are often the exact same. And one is kind of identifying what you're doing from the material frame first, and the other is from the spiritual frame first. And I think regardless of the origins, they have the same effect. Very much the same effect, and they should be respected the same.
Because that's certainly true, right? The science is clear. Actually, you can't tell the difference between someone in prayer and meditation on a brain scan, for example.
Oh, that's interesting.
It looks the same. Yeah, and then to Peterson's point, like, well, we have these museums and there's all this art and it's priceless, and what made it priceless, right? And when was it made, and what is it about? What are the most priceless pieces of art about? And then when you're looking at art, are you actually just praying through symbolism or something? Like, I don't know the answer, right? But it certainly seems plausible that people stare at the art.
Affecting your subconscious. And this is where the whole clean up your room thing is very effective. Because if you can't cope, if you can't deal with your mental crap, if you can't handle that, deal with your physical. And it's like dealing with your physical is teaching you how to deal with your mental. And then, like, what are we? Are we ourselves, or are we our effect on the environment? But I have to slip into another point. This is where you get into the magical. I don't necessarily think that I have or make magical objects, but it's not necessarily for the reasons that you might think. I think everything has that effect if you think about it. Like, I find myself very enamored with curbs from time to time. Not because of the curb, not because of the cement, but because I grew up without sidewalks. And so the kind of majesty of having this care for each other, and someone went out there and made a trail that is above, like, I think about those people. And I value it in this different kind of way. And I think about where I think it's kind of like, if you let yourself, you can fall into that little self-induced psychedelic trip about the freaking wonder of how many years an individual object has been in existence, and what machine it came out of, and what dude twisted what screw, and what was the vision, and who decided the color scheme, and like all of that has this wonder to it. And that's the sublime. And if you let yourself, that's like, the Romantics were very into that. The Romantics and the Surrealists were like, go to a place of town you've never seen, and let yourself become enraptured in the wonder of it. And then you do this Surrealist auto-writing, which is like writing the first thing that comes to mind about the whole experience. Well, that's always available. It's always available to anything. And like, when somebody creates an art piece for someone, it's easier for them to do that. And I think like the people who are commissioning Pageau's work, the magic partially is in this wondrous experience that they could send out their dream and it could be responded to in stone. And so is it blessed? Well, you can't say it's not.
Yeah, that's an interesting connection. So it's something like there's a method of prayer wrapped up in the symbolism, in the interaction with the symbolism, with the art, whatever art it is, and then there's the whole significance around commissioning it and what it means to commission a piece of art, right? And so, if you wanted to define something like magic as a happenstance, right, of on multiple levels coming together at once, right? That would be
right.
the truth and the beauty.
You click in to the reverence of the postmodern piles. Why do people elevate half-popped freaking packing foam and like the lobster phone and like different things like that? Well, because that's part of what they set apart. And as they set it apart, they have discovered they can make anything sacred. And it's its own thing. And maybe they should do it. Maybe it needed to be done for a while. But to not be aware of what they are doing and how they are doing it is, it's purposefully naive of the church. And to let it sneak in to your rafters because you're avoiding other things, and to be picking up people's used convenience stores, I mean, maybe it's okay. Maybe you can sanctify that space, but I don't know. And so, I don't know. It's just stuff I'm thinking about.
No, that's interesting. I mean, I think, yeah, the later art, the more modern type art, to me, they say, oh, you see a normal thing, but you can see it in a different way. Well, that's true of everything. And then everything's art. And then what's the value of art, right? It sort of collapses in on itself very quickly because it doesn't have any historical reference. It's not talking about patterns in the world, right? It's just saying that things have multiple perspectives.
I have to make one more dig at Protestants. So if you think you hold no items apart and you think that you shouldn't have any sacred objects, if any of you are revering a particular mascot or particular colors for particular sports teams and you have set them apart above all others, what have you done? And I just have to throw that in there because it annoys the heck out of me.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that, right?
No,
but maybe
I
we
don't
need
think
a
there
hierarchy.
is. Unless
Yeah,
you
maybe
think
we
you
need-
shouldn't be
need the whole
worshiping,
thing.
unless you think you shouldn't be worshiping any symbols, because if you think you shouldn't have any holy symbols, maybe you should revisit your sports team because they might have snuck in there. Maybe you have a Superman shirt and it makes you feel strong, and you should revisit your symbols. And maybe you might as well have a picture of Mary and Joseph up, because if you're gonna have symbols.
Right. Right. Well, then you want a hierarchy of symbols, so you want your church at the top of that hierarchy, right? Because that's maybe where they belong, is helping you to interface with symbols correctly, so you know good symbols from bad symbols.
Yeah, I think that's my point. I think you don't get to escape symbols, and yeah, I think that might be a good point. I don't know, did we forget anything?
I think that covers most of the interesting things that I heard that you were talking about in a pretty concise way. You know, I like the timeline and expanding the timeline, right? But I'm not sure that it's
Well,
entirely, you know, like I'm not sure you need that right to
I'm
get
just,
the basic point, right?
I get nervous about my times, and I know I don't hold them in my head well, and like, I'm one of those people that sees all the relationships way too quickly, and then I feel like I sound super crazy. So it's a personal crutch. That's all this is. Just
Yeah, no, and I think going into the later timeline stuff, you know, especially like you said, like just before the war to through the wars,
well,
right, the world wars in
there's
particular.
like a bazillion European wars that all relate to why all of this happens, and there's the Quakers and the Plymouth Colony, and just
That's probably too much detail, though,
it's
right?
too
Like,
much
but you just
detail.
really get the basic point across about the
It's too
change
much.
in the relationship to the symbolism
Well,
over
we could have
time.
went into individual artworks and like the Gutenberg altarpiece and like its relationship to trying to get people not to kill lepers and all of that good stuff. But I didn't even plot Hieronymus Bosch. I feel like I should have, but I kind of forgot to. But
Yeah, he's sort of all the way on one side, right? He's on the horror side, right? He goes right past
no,
awe.
no, because he has the other side too. Because it's the whole Garden of Earthly Delights, and then it's more than that. It's just he's just portraying the psychological, and he's just like a little bit more willing to get gross than other people like before his time. Like he's just right on par with Dolly, really. But Dolly comes full circle though, so it's really fascinating. But yeah, I don't know. I suppose we should just wrap it up and call it a day. But I think it was good. I will probably
I think so.
try to just do an intro introducing you, and then that'll be it.
Sure. Whatever you
Alright.
need, let me know. Glad to help.
Thank you very much for trying to help organize me around this subject, because I just would have just probably, I'd still be like over here somewhere trying to explain like the construction of Notre Dame and
No, I think it's super important. I actually put a big long post on the video that Paul did with Pageau there, and
oh
Paul
wow.
loved it. So yeah, because I think this is actually the most important subject in some sense on the whole internet right now. Is this what happened to the symbolism? What's going on with the symbolism? Because it is colonizing people without them realizing it. It has been for
Yeah.
many years.
Well, and it can't just be in people's tattoos. That's just sad. People are running out of space.
That's a good point. They are.
All right. I'll stop recording.